will break down what needs to happen, ultimately understand the game flow of it, but we've already kind of explained what we think is going to happen. It's going to be a lower scoring game. There's when I look at the setup for a low scoring type of game, I look at conference, or in the NFL's case, divisions, right? Rivalry, whether this is an actual bona fide rivalry, however you want to describe it. These two teams do not like each other. Okay. Right. there was a little bit of a disagreement in the hallways of the locker rooms last year. These teams do not like each other. There's been the shade by Jim Harbaugh. There's been the shade by Penn State. Manny Diaz just had a clip today saying you got to know the signs and everything else. There's this whole and Michigan's in the national spotlight and pretty much nationally disliked at this point. I don't know about hated, but nobody likes cheaters and corruption for the games that we all enjoy. Okay, whether you're associated with something bad, whether it turns out to be true or not, this is all alleged, and I hope it's not, because I don't want it to corrupt our game. But if that's the case, man, you've been associated with it. There's these extensive investigations. This is not a good look, whether it is all pushed to the side or something like guilty. The charges are brought and everything. So as far as the game goes, right, the higher scoring games are for teams that are typically unfamiliar with each other. Penn State, Michigan know each other very well. James Franklin, Jim Harbaugh, the two schools, right? Penn State's 4-6 against Michigan in the last decade. This isn't exactly one-sided. Mm-hmm. Michigan has blown out Penn State. Penn State's blown out Michigan. And in this case, these two teams are pretty even matched when you look at the rosters and the depth. Penn State has the home field advantage this time around. I really don't think that Michigan is as good as last year. They've taken a small step back, and it shows, because if Michigan still had that utter dominance, they would be running for 6-7 yards a carry, especially against the opponents that they played. The thing that I key in on, Penn State lost because they didn't have a Marvin Harrison Jr. and Ohio State did. Yeah. Michigan does not have a Marvin Harrison Jr. Kalen King can cover Roman Wilson. Johnny Dixon can cover Roman Wilson. Is Roman Wilson going to win some battles here and there? Absolutely. But it's going to be more of a 50-50 battle, and not Marvin Harrison Jr. absolutely taking over the game with 11 catches, 160 yards, and the touchdown. Michigan does not have that, and Penn State's run defense is holding teams to 1.9 yards per carry, held Ohio State to 1.9 yards per carry on the road. So Michigan does not have that thing that they used to bludgeon Penn State with a year ago. Yeah. Those are the big differences here.
Well, yeah, there are. It's interesting when you said a couple of times that this team isn't as good as last year's team. It's steadier than last year's team. But, you go back to their first 4 games this year, 3 of them without Jim Harbaugh, by the way. I mean, they were almost identical scores against much lesser teams. They were like in the 32-6 range, almost every one of them. And people were wondering, well, they're not even covering the spread. They're not blowing people out. Why are they not scoring 40, 50 points every night? So maybe you're onto something there. When we look at this game, it'll be a clean football game. These teams don't turn the ball over. Penn State doesn't turn the ball over.
1 interception, 1 fumble.
Yeah, and they don't get a lot of penalties. Michigan had a game where it had 0 penalties and had the next game 1 penalty. I've never heard of that before. And, Penn State doesn't make a lot of mistakes either. So it'll be clean. It'll be pure in that regard. I think one of maybe a couple different scenarios could shake out. If Michigan comes in and they haven't played anybody till this Saturday.
I haven't played in an environment like Beaver Stadium either.
I agree. So if they come in there and they show everybody, oh, wow, yeah, we really are good no matter who we're playing, then I could see maybe Michigan winning a 28-14 game if everything goes perfect. If they go in there and they realize that Penn State is more on their level and that crowd gets going, I could see it being a 2017 game either way. And what seems weird about that? It seems weird to see either Penn State or Michigan giving up 20 to 17 points because they haven't yet. The defenses are that good. But so that might be that's a little interesting. But yeah, I could very well see it being a field goal game either way if Penn State has a good day and gets some momentum going and they can hang with Michigan.
Here's how Penn State wins this game. And I hope there's people that are outside of the Penn State fan base to hear this. This is how they can do it. I'm not saying because it's hard to predict turnovers. JJ McCarthy threw how many picks against Bowling Green? And then after that, he's been almost flawless. Right. All 3 interceptions came against Bowling Green. Penn State is the #1 team in setting up its offense. 27% of offensive drives have started in opponent's territory. That is by far the best in the entire country. 27%, Craig, of Penn State's drives have started on the other side of the 50 in opponent's territory. So if Penn State wins this game, they are going to have to force at least one, maybe 2 turnovers to set up the offense to get, because that's what didn't happen against Ohio State. You almost had that type of play, but then Kalen King gets called for the whole pass interference, whatever it was against Marvin Harrison Jr., and that strip sack fumble was completely negated. If that still happens, maybe we're having a different conversation about what Penn State is in that game against Ohio State. You're at Beaver Stadium. I think these teams are a lot closer than people are giving them credit for. I've heard from people that, watch it from afar, that watch Big Ten football, college football from afar, because there's so many teams to spectate, and say Michigan's going to kill them. Penn State has no shot. The fan base, most of the fan base has sold out on this team. Well, here we go, 10-2 again. And that's when football teams in general, especially an emotional program like James Franklin and Penn State, they respond to that stuff. Yeah. When you stroke the ego, when you praise them and sing their praises after the UMass win, I don't think they took that Ohio State game as seriously as they should. I think they went in. Yes, they knew it was important, but Ohio State was very quiet, very timid. Penn State players were doing interviews. James Franklin messing with the reporters, right? All the jokes about just throwing it deep. And then you got a reality check. Penn State needed that against Ohio State. So now it's back to business. Michigan's a little distracted here. If Penn State's going to win this game, it's going to take 2 interceptions of JJ McCarthy, I think. I see, like you said, I see Michigan winning this game a lot of different ways. I see Penn State winning it a few ways. Yeah. And I'm going to take the fact that it's the perfect storm. It's at Beaver Stadium. The whole national media attention is on you, Jim Harbaugh and Michigan, and not in a good way. And then the motivation factor, Penn State will have a 418. That's all anybody's saying in my comments. That's all anybody's saying to Penn State players to mess with them, to try to make fun of them or whatever. That's just fuel to the fire, man. They take that stuff personally, and they've only talked about that number since it happened last season. I think Penn State wins. Now, Penn State is not as good at red zone defense as people think. So I will give a final score prediction here. I'm going to go 23-21. It stays under that 44.5, 45.5, wherever you're looking at the lines on FanDuel. It is 45.5. But I say 23-21, Penn State. Michigan will convert inside the red zone. Penn State isn't perfect there. They actually do let up touchdowns and don't hold teams to field goals as routinely as they should. So when Michigan does get into the red zone, I don't think they'll have any problems punching it in with Blake Corum and or Donovan Edwards. But I think Penn State can actually pull it off and do it. And the conversation is going to be completely changed here, Craig.
Well, that's a great stat you gave earlier about them playing on a short field. If they could pull that off, that would be a great advantage. And you're right, though. It seems like the whole season hinged on that strip fumble with the holding call against Ohio State, because that was the game, I think, right there. And that just tells you, though, that Penn State is right there with the Michigans and Ohio States. And you and I talking here tonight, I think we're in agreement. In low 20s, the field goal either way. This game's going to be close. I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. I've heard a lot of people say this way, oh man, I wish this was the primetime game. And we got the Buckeyes and Michigan State in primetime. That's a 32-point spread in that one. I think this Michigan-Penn State game is going to be the thriller game of the weekend.
Yeah, and that's why Fox does it the way, and I'll keep that short because as we wrap up here, the reason Fox puts these games at noon is because that is the only game. All the eyeballs are going to be on Penn State, Michigan. Why compete with the mid-afternoon games, the SEC on CBS, the ESPN primetime 7 o'clock, 7:30 games? You can put this one at 8, have the whiteout in November. But the reason Fox does it is from a business standpoint, and they will get millions of viewers, much more than they would trying to compete for eyeballs in those other time slots. So they do it for the money, for the numbers. I get it. People don't agree with it, but that's why they do it, because they know everybody's going to watch Penn State, Michigan, and not Charlotte versus, Maryland, right? Let's just pick two teams, but that's who's in the noon slot. ESPN knows that they can put Alabama, LSU, that was last week, in the 7 o'clock slot. But Fox says, why should we compete with that when we can have everybody's attention in the noon slot? And that's what's going to happen. Everybody's going to be watching that game, whether it's the 107,000 plus. This might set a record. This might be the most attended game in Penn State Beaver Stadium history on Saturday. It's also going to be, I think it's going to set a record for the most watched as well.
Well, of the millions of people watching, I'll be watching and you'll be there. So we'll have it covered. You'll be doing your post game there. I'll be going live on Locked On Big Ten YouTube as well. So it's going to be huge. It's going to be worthy of everybody watching, and I can't wait.